howled through the broken buildings, the remnants of what once was a thriving city, now reduced to a ghostly shell. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a dim, eerie light over the decaying streets. Faint whispers echoed through the empty alleys, as though the city itself was trying to speak to the living, or warn them. Inside an old, crumbling house, Sarah clutched her rifle tightly, her wide eyes scanning the darkened room. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the air smelled like damp earth and rot. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest as she listened for any sign of movement. "We can't keep doing this, James," she muttered, her voice trembling. She glanced over at her companion, James, who stood near the window, his gaze fixed on the desolate street below. The faint glow of the moon cast shadows on his rugged face, giving him an almost ghostly appearance. "We don't have a choice," James replied, his voice cold and distant. "We need food, water, and those damn things won't stop hunting us." The damn things were what remained of humanity, or what was left of it. The dead, undead, whatever you wanted to call them, had returned after the outbreak. At first, they had been mindless monsters, hunting down anyone they could find. But now they were different. They seemed to remember things, people, places, the way they used to be. But they weren't friendly anymore. The undead were twisted reflections of their former selves, and they had no mercy for the living. A sudden sound from the outside made both Sarah and James freeze. A low growl, like the rumble of thunder in the distance. "It's them," Sarah whispered, her hand tightening on the rifle's grip. James didn't respond. Instead, he moved towards the door and peered through the crack. "I think it's Derek," he muttered, his voice filled with a strange mixture of fear and uncertainty. "He used to live in the house next door." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Derek had been one of their closest friends before the outbreak, a kind soul who had always been there when they needed him. But that was before he died, before they all died. She had seen it with her own eyes. Derek had been torn apart from the first wave of the undead. They had buried him, but now he was back. "We have to leave," Sarah said urgently, her voice shaking. "We can't take any chances. He's not our friend anymore." James hesitated. "But what if it's really him? What if he remembers us?" "He's dead, James," Sarah snapped, her voice rising in panic. "He can't remember anything, not like that." The growl grew louder, closer. The sound of dragging footsteps echoed through the house. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. This was not the Derek she once knew. It couldn't be. James looked over at her, his expression a mix of doubt and fear. "We don't have to fight. We can talk to him. Try to understand." "No," Sarah interrupted, panic surging through her. "It's not him anymore. If we don't leave now, we're both dead." The dragged footsteps stopped outside the door. Derek's low, guttural voice whispered from the other side. "Sarah, James, I'm home." The hairs on Sarah's neck stood on end. It sounded like Derek, but it wasn't. It couldn't be. "Please don't," she begged, backing away from the door. "I swear you're not him anymore." A cold, eerie laugh followed. The voice that spoke was no longer Derek's. It was something twisted and wrong. The sound was sickening like nails on a chalkboard. Then the door slammed open with a violent crash, and Derek stood there, his face a grotesque parody of the man they had known. His eyes were milky white, his skin decayed and falling off in places. He grinned at them, revealing yellow, broken teeth. "I told you I'm home," he rasped, stepping into the room. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Sarah raised her rifle, but her hands were shaking too much to aim properly. James stepped forward, his voice soft and pleading. "Derek, please, you don't have to do this." Derek's grin widened, and his eyes flickered with a dark recognition. "You never did understand, did you, James? I remember everything. I remember you, both of you, and now I'm going to make sure you never forget me." With a sudden, unnatural speed, Derek lunged forward, his hands reaching for James' throat. Sarah reacted instinctively, firing her rifle. The shot rang out, echoing through the room, but it didn't seem to faze him. Derek didn't fall. Instead, he twisted his head back to face her, his eyes now full of rage. "You think you can stop me, Sarah? You think I don't know who you are?" Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, terrified. There was no escaping this nightmare. The undead had memories of who they once were, and they were using them against the living. "James!" she screamed, but James was already struggling with Derek, trying to pry the undead man's hands away from his neck. The fight was futile. Derek was stronger now, his body fueled by something other than the frailty of death. In one desperate move, Sarah lunged forward and grabbed a newly broken piece of wood, swinging it towards Derek. The splintered wood drove into his chest with a sickening crunch, but even that didn't stop him. "You can't kill what's already dead," he snarled, his voice dripping with malice. With one final, terrifying growl, Derek lunged towards James. But in that moment, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the house. The undead were coming. Sarah looked at James, her face pale and covered in sweat. They both knew they couldn't win. The dead had already won. The world had changed, and there were nothing but survivors in a world where life and death no longer held meaning. As the shadows of the undead closed in, Sarah and James shared one final glance. There was no escape, no redemption, only the terrifying, inevitable